Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 187 for the podcast. Today, we're joined by Sean Macdonald, CEO of Kainova Therapeutics. With more than 20 years of biotech leadership and deep expertise in strategy and development, Sean is guiding the company through an exciting new chapter. We'll dive into Kainova's innovative GPCR-modulating platform, its promising pipeline, the science behind reversing tumor immunosuppression and targeting inflammation, and the reasons behind the recent rebrand from Domain Therapeutics to Kainova Therapeutics. We'll also be taking a look at the broader oncology landscape, what's hot, who's investing big, and where the biggest opportunities and challenges lie. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sean Macdonald. Sean, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sean, why don't you walk us through your journey in biotech? What was it that really first sparked your interest early on?
That's a great question. I think that, to be perfectly honest, it goes back to my high school days. I had a very successful sister who was on the business side, and I didn't want to be compared at the level of my parents. So that was what initially drove me into science, and it turned out I really enjoyed it. I had great chemistry teacher, great biology teacher, and that's what really kind of pushed me towards that as I moved into university. I think ultimately what kind of led me more onto the business side was I realized that micropipetting was not my future. And so I was looking for alternatives of how to use my molecular biology degree, which didn't require me to carry on, do a PhD and a couple of postdocs before I was ready to be employable. And so ended up working with a couple of friends on some business plans for some university profs, and went back, did an MBA, market research, business development, and it really was kind of in business development that you get a lot of, particularly when you're working for small biotechs, a lot of access to strategy and, product development and, these types of items, and, ultimately led me to the role that I'm in today.
Tell me a little bit more about this career, though, because it's been more than 20 years since you came out of that study there. What sort of roles have you held along the way?
Sure. So I got my very first, I would say, true industrial start, because I mentioned I hooked up with a couple of friends and we were doing business plans and things. And that's because we actually created our own consulting business. But I realized relatively quickly that your mid-20s is not necessarily the right time to be a industry consultant. Certainly didn't have enough gray hair at the time. And ended up in a role in market research for a group called Shire Biochem here in Montreal. So it was shortly after the acquisition of Biochem Pharma by Shire. Spent a little bit of time in venture capital locally before going to one of the portfolio companies in business development. And that's really what kind of, I would say, set me on a career path. I bounced around a little bit up into that point, but I think what I particularly liked about business development was the breadth. The way that I describe business development to people is you're the decathlete. So you're not the first place finisher in regulatory, in science and clinical, et cetera, but you need to have enough in each of those different areas to be able to rally everybody to the cause and make sure you get these deals in place. So I've mostly worked on the out licensing side. So got started in business development here in Montreal, moved over to Copenhagen, Denmark for about 4 years. And then ended up actually in Ghent, Belgium. So that's a company that probably most people are familiar with, Ablinks, which were really the pioneers for the nanobodies. So these single chain camelid antibodies ultimately got acquired by Sanofi, but then came back to Canada. Ended up actually working for the first time now in licensing. And so I helped a local actual generics company here build up their specialty pharma business. So a lot of in licensing there, got exposed to a completely different part of the industry. So late stage, life cycle management type of questions, as well as generics, which I think a lot of people who have a background in early stage drug development don't necessarily get. But it gave a different perspective. Now, ultimately, I had the itch to get back into early stage stuff, hooked up with a local early stage VC. Domain Therapeutics was the first role that I had as CEO. I can say with experience, being an undercapitalized biotech going into the pandemic is not something I would recommend for those listening. But it also led me on this journey where I took on some supplemental roles and ultimately connected through their investors to a company called Domain Therapeutics that at the time in 2023 was based in Strasbourg, and then ultimately led to me becoming their CEO in April of 2024.
That's Domain Therapeutics. It's now Kainova Therapeutics, right?
It's now Kainova Therapeutics. Yeah, yeah. So I
What's
can
that
kind
all
of walk
about?
you through.
What are
Yeah,
you
sure.
what are you working on at Kainova?
Yeah. So I think that what we're working on at Kainova is GPCR-based drug discovery. So GPCRs are a category of target, several in the body. So probably about 800 or so GPCR targets. Only about a third of those right now so far have been drugged. But it's been a source of a whole bunch of products that have been successfully taken all the way through to market. So it's an area of high interest. It remains an area of high interest. And Domain Therapeutics, so the predecessor in terms of name to Kainova, was also involved in GPCR-based drug discovery since about 2008. So they have a long history. Their technology platform had been heavily licensed through that period. So they did a lot of work with large pharmaceutical companies. And to be perfectly frank, the platform that we have is still in demand. Why? Because unlike some other platforms that need to lock the GPCR into a certain configuration to allow for drug discovery, we can actually deal with the native receptor. And what that means is that, from a development standpoint, we can actually find molecules, not just antagonists, but allosteric modulators, et cetera, and then measure the downstream signaling to come up with the right profile for a therapeutic. And that also means that we're able to move a little bit outside of we'd say, the more traditional areas of GPCR drug discovery, which is CNS, neurology, and cardiometabolic, into things like immuno-oncology and inflammation, which are the two areas where we are focused. Now, you asked me kind of Kainova Domain, what's the deal there? I think that, as mentioned, Domain had a long history. I think that they had a couple of different iterations of business model along the way, but in 2021, they took an active decision to start building up more intrinsic value within their internal pipeline. So to kind of follow that more traditional, hey, we're going to use our tech platform, build our own pipeline of products, drive those forward into the clinic, and then create value for shareholders. And so they did a Series A in 2022 that really kind of kicked off that process. I came on board partway through that journey. What we've been really trying to do over the last couple of years is accelerate that, create some more focus. We've changed around a little bit of the prioritization of the pipeline. From a structure standpoint, we've hired on our first employee in the United States, our chief medical officer. And the way that I was describing it at JP Morgan this year, because this is a relatively new transition in terms of trademark, but the way I was describing it is that we've rebuilt the car from the inside out over the last 18 months, and this is the final paint job. So this is, representative of that change, but still part of that overall journey. And we think, is in line with what we're trying to portray to the outside market, that this clinical focus, this internationalization of the business, these are things that are a pronounced change, even though it's still an evolutionary step, but still a pronounced change to who we were. And we wanted a new name and logo to reflect that.
And can you tell me a little bit about the name? Because there's a story behind Kainova. It didn't come out of nowhere, right?
Sure. Yeah. So I haven't been involved in a lot of rebrands in my career. It's a different group of folks that you're dealing with when you're undergoing this. I'm assuming that those in marketing at Big Pharma, when they're coming up with new brand names for products, go through something similar. But you get a whole slew of different names, and each one has a story behind it. And I think it's always a matter of the falling in love with the story, falling in love with the name, or falling in love with the color scheme and logo, or and you're trying to find the right intersection of all of those three. In the case of Kainova, I think that we like the name itself, but also to the story behind it. So Kai comes from Kairos, which is Greek for sort of inflection point. So moment of change. And we felt that that was an apt description of where we found ourselves. And then Nova, I believe it's Latin for kind of innovation or new. And so kind of the combination of those two concepts, and I mean, we were in the midst of a financing round at that point as well. It sort of felt like, yeah, we're on the cusp of kind of this next stage here. And we're bringing something completely novel and new with our pipeline. And, it just sort of felt right.
You mentioned that funding round. That's closed off now. Is it 32 million that you've raised now and just announced
That's
to put forward?
that's correct. Yeah. And so that really allows us to deliver. So we have our DT7012 program, which is an anti-CCR8 ADCC ADCP optimized antibody. So ADCC optimized basically means that it has been optimized for better interaction with the immune system. And why is that important? Because the mechanism of action for that product is to deplete T regulatory cells. So T regulatory cells are kind of within the immune system, you have a natural kind of balance, and T regulatory cells are one of the dampening populations of cells. And so by removing those from the tumor microenvironment, then you can kind of reestablish the immunocompetence that's needed in order to be able to attack the tumor. And so that's the class of compounds that we're part of. CCR8 is the target, and we're in a phase one right now. And so, the phase one is going very, very well. It's in Australia. We're up to the highest dose cohort now. This Series B will help us to generate a couple of key data sets coming out of that. Obviously, the safety, which is the primary purpose of the phase one, but also, too importantly, the biomarker data. And so far we have biomarker data in the blood, which shows that we are depleting T regulatory cells as we would expect and hope for our product. But the key data set towards the end of Q2, beginning of Q3 this year will be around replicating that same T reg depletion now in the tumor microenvironment itself. And so we started our parabiopsy program, and that's really what this financing is to deliver on in terms of a key catalyst for that program. We do have a second program, DT9046. It's a small molecule negative allosteric modulator of something called PAR2. PAR2 is, expressed on a whole variety of different cell types, but has really established itself as kind of a key player in the inflammatory space. And so when I say inflammation, it could be atopic dermatitis, that could be inflammatory bowel disorder, but it really kind of has a wide variety of different places where it could have utility. And the additional use of proceeds that we have is to get that teed up to move into the clinic in 2027.
So DT7012, DT9046, but you've also got DT9081. That's on immunosuppression,
Yep.
right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So DT9081, it targets something called EP4 receptor. And so it's kind of the last step in the cascade, the COX-2 kind of inflammatory cascade, and it's been pretty well established as having a role in cancer resistance. And so you can see within the literature, that you have kind of poorer outcomes for patients that where this particular pathway is activated. I think that for us, it was a very tough decision. So we had completed a phase one at the end of 2025. At the end of 2024. On the DT9081 program. And so, we kind of finished off all the tables, listings, and figures and report through the course of 25. But ultimately, we took a decision to move that forward in the context of an investigator-initiated trial or investigator-sponsored trial rather than using proceeds from the Series B, mostly because the main efficacy that we see is in combination. And so in immuno-oncology at the moment, it's tougher to get VC support for those types of combination trials. It might be a little bit easier now that Ono has actually put out a press release that their anti-EP4 receptor program has shown survival benefit in gastric cancer. But we're obviously following that closely. But for the moment, it's still moving ahead in an investigator-sponsored trial, and we're hoping to get it back into the active development pipeline, probably with either the Series C or future financings.
So 7012 is the lead asset for now. That's the one we should be watching out for this year.
That's correct. Yeah. 7012 is the lead asset. It's the one to watch. I think generally speaking, the CCR8 space is worth watching in 2026. We had some interesting data at ASCO last year from Shionogi and Lenovo, which got acquired by Sino, as well as some interesting biomarker data coming out towards the back end of the year by Coherus, which actually prompted some analysts to take up, covering them. At ASCO this year, we'll see. I do expect some more data. Is it time now for some of these larger players to start reading out? I think that time will tell, but I think it could be a very interesting year for CCR8 and perhaps an inflection point for the space overall.
And is the platform at Kainova, is that available for licensing? Is that something you want to license out right now?
Yep. It is available. As a matter of fact, we've just closed another small transaction around that, an option deal. I think that we have our research team, with obviously, as I mentioned, been around since 2008, a tremendous amount of know-how in GPCR drug discovery, a lot of experience in how to use the platform. I think that it does remain available for partnering. We tend to partner outside of our core therapeutic areas because we don't want to, give any worry to the pharma partner that will be in competition, but that's not usually a hard sell since most companies that are looking at GPCRs, look in the traditional areas, cardiometabolic and neurology.
So that's the Kainova pipeline. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about oncology more broadly.
Sure.
What's exciting for you in oncology today? I mean, there's obviously so much going on, but you've got AI being used for drug development. You've got these personalized vaccines, immunotherapies, immuno-oncology as a whole area there. What's got you excited?
So we know so much more about oncology today than we knew 20 years ago. And I think it's impressive, the leaps and bounds that we've made in terms of understanding oncology. But oncology itself is a massive space of complex patient biomarker profiles. There's still a debate as to whether or not we should be distinguishing based upon organ type or biosignatures. And so, because there's still just so much more for us to learn. I think that the wave of immunotherapies with the immune checkpoint inhibitors that came out, it opened up a whole new space, a whole new layer of understanding that we need to interrogate. And so I think that's what's exciting. I think oncology in terms of an area of focus, we talk about it coming and going from a VC appetite perspective, but the reality is, big pharma. I can't think of any of the top 15 that don't have an oncology franchise of some level, and different ones take different tacks. I mean, radiotherapies come and go, ADCs come and go, but the reality is that there still is room for immunotherapies, and I think that continued understanding of exactly how to leverage the body's natural arsenal, how to beat cancer at its own game, and let the body get back to what it's supposed to do, which is to fight off these types of foreign invaders. I mean, that's an interesting problem, and I think that's what keeps us, I would say, motivated, and I think particularly interested in the oncology space. I think AI is an interesting one. AI, the way that we kind of understand it is there's three pillars. There's the quantum, or sorry, the computing power that you have or you need. There's the data set that you feed the model with, and then there's the algorithm that's behind the model. And I think that, our understanding is that from an algorithm perspective, the vast majority of AI algorithms being applied to biotech are still kind of following that same large language model type of format where, if you think back 20, 25 years when you had the the real telephones and you're trying to write a text message, you would automatically assume that the H comes after the T because most times if you start with a T, you're writing the word the. And so that same sort of iterative approach is applied, which means that the data set needs to be really, really strong. And as I just mentioned, we have a tremendous amount of information that we can feed into these models, but there's still a lot that's missing. And I think any one biotech on its own to be able to kind of fill in all those blanks, it's just really, really tough. And so how that's going to play out is something we're keeping a close eye on. And then, I think it's nothing revolutionary to say that AlphaSense was a big, big step forward. But if we want to go to that next layer of understanding, then you need more computing power. And so not necessarily to send the servers out into space, which is what I'm hearing about a lot these days, but quantum computing seems to be the next frontier in that. And so this is something that we're keeping a close eye on. I think we're looking selectively, following guidance from the FDA. They're trying to use more AI and fewer animals in tox studies. So definitely keeping abreast because for us, we want to remain competitive from a drug development timeline as well as drug development cost perspective. But at the moment, our platform and our libraries are still delivering compounds for partners as well as for our own internal pipeline. And so we haven't felt that we're hampered by not having our own proprietary AI from a drug discovery standpoint.
You mentioned before you were talking about Kainova at JPM. Makes me think back at JPM this year, one of the biggest deals that was announced was not an acquisition. It wasn't a biotech pharma partnership. It was NVIDIA coming on board with a whole lot of computing power for the industry there. I mean, you're right. When it comes to oncology, there are just so many big pharma companies and almost everybody's got an oncology program. When it comes to really innovative immunotherapies for oncology, who are the big pharma companies that you think are doing a particularly good job right now?
Yeah. I think, well, look, I think we keep pretty close tabs on those big pharmas that are developing anti-CCR8s, right? And I think that so therefore we're tracking BMS, and I appreciate that BMS, they've had some ups and downs with regards to their immunotherapy portfolio. I think the recent deal that Gilead did in the oncology space, I mean that's indicative of their continued support for it. Obviously, Merck with the Keytruda asset as they look towards a patent cliff. I mean they've been pretty active in trying to figure out, well, how do they remain active and relevant in that space? And so they have other follow-on assets and follow-on products. I think that what's interesting for me when it comes to immunotherapy, when you're looking at the BMS's, Merck's, J&J's, et cetera, of the world, they did a lot of their shopping in the last decade. And so, what they're kind of presenting at ASCO are these combination trials, how these different things actually interact together and with those new modalities like ADCs and which line of therapy, et cetera. At least that's sort of our read on it. But I would say that, again, everybody's trying, right? And I feel badly for GSK and their spectacular blow up with TIGIT, because there was a lot of hope that was still going to show something just based upon all the early excitement around that particular target. But, even some of these companies that you wouldn't necessarily immediately associate with immunotherapy, they're still taking a kick at the can, even if they're not the most prominent.
And in terms of the deals that they're making, the sorts of partnering agreements that they're making, do you see any trend towards sort of later stage deals, trying to fill up when that patent cliff approaches?
I think definitely everybody's trying to fill up for the patent cliff. I think, and this is my own reading of the tea leaves here. So I'm sure if you spoke with a bank, you'd get a more intelligent response. But I think that as we kind of look back, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, right? These were tough years. Tough years from a financing perspective, tough years from a deal-making perspective. But these companies still ticked along. The ones that were all cashed up, you can critique that they went and did their IPO too early, but they got cashed up and were able to take stuff forward fairly far. And so we've actually seen now some unexpectedly high valuations. I mean, you just need to look at Abivax in Europe last year. This was a company that people had almost, I wouldn't say written off, but certainly did not expect to generate the value that it did. And so betting on some of these later stage assets has definitely borne some fruit for folks. And I think that generally speaking, that's what people are going for. I think I've heard the term barbell shaped, deal making apply, because on the early side, to come back to your other, your other question about platforms and new modalities, there's definitely still an appetite, for that type of technology, but more so they're looking for those exact products. Now, the trend towards late stage deal making has been there for I would say a good 18 months already. And so that late stage phase 3 pipeline has already been kind of picked, not necessarily dry, but, certainly these big pharma have sophisticated search and evaluation functions that have looked through that. And so they are starting to look, well, have already started to look a little bit earlier, but for opportunities that can have an early launch. So it can still kind of, reach the market. So breakthrough therapies, accelerated approvals, and things like that. These are all important pieces of a biotech storytelling in order to attract, that type of attention. I think the other trend that we see is that there are more mid-sized pharma. Just generally speaking, there are more companies now that have been successful with their first products and are building themselves up, and so they have the same needs as the large pharma. They need to renew their pipelines. They need to add to their pipelines. They have analysts and investors who are saying, "Oh, well, what's next?" Right? And so as the size, and these are companies that do relatively large size deals as well. Not everyone is going to go for 30 billion. But I think a lot of VC investors would be satisfied with a 1 to 3 billion type of transaction. This is a space for mid-sized players as well. And so both in terms of the increase number, more mid-sized players who have been successful, and now I would say a trend towards them having to fill their pipelines as well. It opens up a part of the M&A space that shouldn't be ignored, and I think is only good for biotech companies that they have more options.
We've had a couple of people on the show in the last couple of months. Jennifer Altamonte of Fusic Biotech, even just last month, Claire Waring of Cumulus Oncology. And both put out there this idea that they think we're getting closer and closer to making cancer chronic. So not curable, but chronic. Is that something you can see happening as well?
So I think that, again, cancer and oncology, big words. I would say that certain subpopulations, biomarker-driven populations, yes. I think that I've actually heard the joke at an oncology conference. Well, we better hurry up, and if we're doing this well in oncology, we better hurry up and find the cure for Alzheimer's, because we all got to die of something, right? And so absolutely, it's something that we're making some extraordinary advances, and you just need to look at some of the data sets coming out at ASCO, and I expect more this year as well, for specific subpopulations. But then there are others that are graveyards. Certainly anybody with pancreatic cancer right now would not sense that they're only a couple of steps away from making this chronic. Some of the other cold tumors, MSS positive, CRC, and things like that. So these are I would say, well, I think it's MSS negative anyway, but just these subpopulations of cancer patients still have high unmet need. There's still a lot of work trying to crack them, trying to find these solutions, and I mean, luckily for us, if it's too risky for a VC, a lot of governments, NIH, European Union funding. I mean, these guys are stepping in to try to help find solutions for those patients and help support those companies that are being brave enough to really going after those intractable tumor types.
Sean, let's look forward a little bit. What's next for Kainova? You said you've got some data that's going to be read out, or a trial that's going to finish Q2, Q3?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think that for us, by everything I just said, we're trying to apply at Kainova. So we've identified an indication for a pivotal trial that could allow for an accelerated approval before the end of the decade. And so even though we're just completing our phase 1A, phase 2 now, towards the back end of this year, we do have a pivotal trial that could allow for a launch before the end of the decade and still fit within that patent cliff window. So that was an important consideration for us. I think additionally, we were really looking to maximize the optionality that we have, that this is something that we could actually take to market ourselves as a biotech. So, you think that through. That means that the approvable data set can't be in 1,000 patients. It's got to be in a small enough sample size to be funded by a VC. But also, too, you're looking for a concentration of prescribers in the marketplace that allows it to be addressed by kind of a biotech-sized sales force. So these were considerations that we had in ultimately picking our indication for the next step. What we're looking to do through the course of this year is to shore up, and we've got optionality. We have the potential for a Series C financing, towards the back end of this year that could then fund that next step. But also, too, we have some transactions under discussion, both around the platform as well as around some of our other assets that could bring in some non-dilutive capital. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, once you have a bank account that's relatively flush, that's when it's easier to access additional non-dilutive capital. And so, we're applying all of those levers right now to try to set ourselves up to have enough cash on hand towards the back end of this year to then take us through to those data points in the pivotal trial for DT7012.
And will we see Kainova at ASCO at ESMO this year?
Yes and yes. So I think that we're starting with ACR, to sort of roll out some of the additional preclinical work that we're doing around our DT7012 program and others. We are working really hard. If my chief medical officer does listen to this podcast, he's going to be upset. Just one more layer of pressure on him as we're trying to get as much data as we can out of the clinical trial to support then an abstract at ASCO. But obviously, we will have completed the trial and have kind of what we would see as a more comprehensive data set to be able to present at ESMO as we come into the back half of the year.
And will we also see you at these partnering events? Will you be there at Bio or at Bio Europe?
If not me, our VP of Business Development will certainly be there. I think the next one for me, I'm going to be at LSX Miami. I'm on a panel there about partnering. But then we absolutely will be at Bio Europe. We have a contingent that's going to be at the Bio conference as well. As we move into the back end of the year, we're looking at some of the banker conferences, and obviously JP Morgan remains a mainstay for us, and I think for most of the industry as a nice way of kind of kicking off the year and setting priorities.
And if people are interested in learning a little bit more about Kainova, where should they go?
I think that step one is to go to the website. I think that our LinkedIn page as well contains a lot of the history of who we are and what we're focused on. But I think ultimately, if they do have a desire to learn more about us, then they can reach out, and we'll make sure to put them in touch with the right person at Kainova to be able to address what it is they're looking for.
Sean, it's a new name, a new year, exciting things happening. Thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
A real pleasure, Dylan. Thanks very much.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.